Kia ora tātou, no mai hari mai. My name is Stuart Brown. I'm the Director of Arts and Culture and Mahi Toi for the city. Prior to that I was Director of the Museum and been involved with the project actually since the building closed. To my right, your left, is Amy McGregor. Amy McGregor is our Director of Projects across our group, and has been involved in the project with me for quite a number of years. So firstly, thank you everybody for attending today. My job here today is to really give you the facts about the museum, the options that Council's asking the community to consider, and also why we're actually coming back and asking you again. Just a little bit of history about the building and where we started. So the building sits on Ngāti gifted land. It was gifted originally in the late 1800s for a school, or certainly for educational purposes. It's a Category 1 heritage listed building. It sits in the district plan as a listed building, and it has some special requirements for it in terms of anything that happens internally and externally of it. It was the first tourism investment by the central government of the day back in 1908, and that was really to try and recapture tourists back to Rotorua after the destruction of the pink and white terraces in 1886. As we all know, it's it's a loved building, and it's one of the most photographed buildings in the country, particularly for tourists. The museum, prior to closure, had around about 120,000 visitors to it each year, and around 700,000 visitors to Government Gardens in itself. And it's obviously a strategic asset for not just for the council but for the community. The building closure, additional cracks were found after the Kaikoura earthquake in November 2016. So staff arrived back at the building. We observed some of the cracks we already knew about, but opened up. There were additional cracks there. A decision was made to close the building for public safety and for the safety of our visitors and staff. And then later on, the investigations by the structural engineers came to the conclusion after the investigation that the building was 19% of new building standard. So a new building standard came about after the Christchurch earthquake, where they reviewed the Building Act to ensure that buildings in the future don't fail under seismic events. And then under the Building Act, anything under a 34% new building standard is considered an earthquake-prone building, and legally requires strengthening within a certain time period, depending on the region of New Zealand where you live. So we're considered a medium risk zone, whereas Wellington is considered a high risk zone, as it does Napier. It's one of the most complex buildings to strengthen in the country. We have the best minds and the best structural engineers been involved in the project for some time now. Complexity is added by what you can do and what you can't do within the building in terms of insertion of any earthquake strengthening solution to protect as much as the original heritage fabric as we can. It's 115 years old. It's sat in a fairly toxic environment with, as we all know, living in Rotorua, what hydrogen sulfide does to our metal objects and bolts and nails, etc. She's now 115 years old, and the construction methodology back between 1906 and 1908 was very much using materials that were around the building at the time, which was pumice material and concrete and unreinforced concrete. It also sits on geothermal active ground, so it releases hydrogen sulfide. And for those that have been in the basement, we're familiar with what happens down there. There's also been successive building additions and alterations, particularly in the 60s and 70s and in the 80s when the Tudor Towers was there, and then extensions in 2008 and 2011 provided different structural methodologies around the original heritage. The exhibition, we're treating that as a separate project. So that currently requires about $10 million to complete the new exhibition. We currently have secured $4.5 million of that, and of the 4.1 million has been raised by the Rotorua Museum Centennial Trust, who raised the original $23 million back between 2008 and 2011 for the extensions. The master plan for that is now complete, and that is required for us to apply for additional funding, so a bit of a criteria of funding applications. And this exhibition program will be paused now until a decision is made on the museum. The project so far, Council consulted with the community back in 2018 as part of the long-term plan. At that time, the community supported, I think the rating about 80% at the time supported to get on with the building. So we're still very much in that phase. 15.5 million, was approved by Council for funding at that time. And then over the period of between now and mid-2019-20, a further 38 million has been raised through external funding, which goes a total of 53.5 million, and that was thought to be enough at the time. Of the 38 million, 10 million came from the local Rotorua Trust, 70 million from the PGF fund, or Kanoa as we know it now, and then 5 million from the Ministry of Heritage and Culture, and then lotteries as well.
Oh yeah, he's just gone away. Yeah, he was just gone away on a big cruise today.
We've completed all the testing that was required, so remembering that a 1906 building doesn't come with an engineering manual about the strengths and the strengths of the materials used, what resilience they've got after 115 years, and so a significant amount of testing was required. But we're now facing a total project cost of 81.4 million as an estimate.
What have we spent so far, Stuart?
About 8.5. Yeah. If I can just hold questions at the end, because I do want to try and get through the whole presentation, so you've got plenty of time for questions, otherwise we might run out of time, but I appreciate your question. Why consult again? It's 5 years ago since we last consulted, and the project's changed in terms of its cost to complete. More is known about the building, so particularly since the last time we consulted, particularly about ground conditions. And it's required under Council's policy to reconsult because the current additional funding is not available in the current LTP period, although we've got 1 year to run. Council is required on that basis. So what we want to know from you, and this is a really important conversation for our community to have, it still wants to know whether you still want to strengthen this building and reopen it as a museum. And if not, then there's a couple of options that Council wants the community to consider and feedback on. The first option is to continue to fully restore the building as per the long-term plan approved in 2018. And so what does that look like? And it means strengthening the building from 19% to 80%. That we complete all the compliance required to reopen the building in terms of fire, accessibility, ablutions. We fix all the weather type issues that the building's had for decades really. Climate control systems for the museum, improve visitor circulation, and then there's the improvement in the amenities, and I'll talk about that because I've got some photographs for that. Ground floor, so a new compliant lift. So in the existing building, for those who remember, we had a little narrow lift, and you press the button and you throw the coin up to see whether you get to the top or not. So this will be a full compliant lift that actually gives the museum access as well to hold exhibitions up on the mezzanine floor, which you couldn't really do before. And it also provides accessibility to the mud bath basement, which we couldn't provide before, unless you actually left the building and went around the back onto the grass and got in that way. Mud bath basement, access, so access will actually go from the lift at one end of the building, from the south wing all the way through to the north wing where you used to walk under, so we've got better flows rather than having people going back on each other. Extension of the cafe, the introduction of a mezzanine floor which increases the capacity, which increases our ability to earn revenues and future proofing. And it would also provide secondary fire egress from the viewing platform area. Addition of a conference space, which is up on the mezzanine floor where the two small offices were. They were actually insertions a little bit later, we're taking those out. So that gives us a space where we can hold talks, public talks, meetings, and particularly a space to hire as well. And then reinstatement of some of the heritage features. So the picture here was originally the corridor where the cafe sits today, 1908. What is sort of how it looked in 2016 when we closed. And then there's a rendition of what it would look like potentially in 2025, which is reinstating the original, the roof sarking areas, and the skylights were in place at that time. And glazing separates the cafe, which helps us with controlling the air into the museum. And then heritage reinstatement, so some of the gems will be uncovered. This was the Rachel pool that sat under the cafe actually. So that's been excavated, and we will show that in some form as an exhibition space within the cafe, but show what the space was originally utilised for. Option A, what does that look like in terms of funding? So currently the funding on the left, 15.5 million from council, 38 raised externally. To achieve the 81.4, what that would mean is an additional 9 million from council. We have some additional support from central government. I can't talk about those agencies at this time because they actually need to make those announcements formal once council makes its decision. Additional 9 million. And so we're still in the business of finding an additional 10 million from other funders to complete within the 81.4. The implications and risks for option A. 24 million funded through borrowing, but there's those other funding elements to be considered that I've just mentioned. There's $8.5 million already spent, and that would mean approximately a 1.8% increase of $73.50 a year for ratepayers. And then RLC would need to fund any further gaps through borrowing. The risks, we can't find the additional $10 million in funding required under the 81.4 price. And it's pretty fair to say that in recent times construction escalation costs have really come back to bite the industry in a number of different ways. And so there is that risk of further escalation over the build period. Option B, which is really option A, but option B is taking a staged approach to it over time. So option B is that we strengthen the building, make it watertight and fire protection, which is estimated to take about 54 million. It's covered by current funding, and that's subject to all funders agreeing to this option. Now we do have one central government agency already indicated that they will only support option A. The museum will be closed at the completion of stage 1, simply because it wouldn't be able to get code of compliance. Stage 2 gives us more time to find external funding, in other words the $28 million gap that we currently would have. And then that includes finishing the fit out, the services, so that the museum can open. Costs are unknown because we don't know how long it's going to take us to raise those funds, to restart a project, and the time frame for escalation. The museum would reopen at the completion of stage 2, but I don't have a date for that at this point in time. Implications for option B. is that council will contribute 16 million for this, so an extra half a million originally. That will cost approximately 1.2% in rates, or $46 odd per year for the next 10 years. There will be a further rate increase for stage 2 once costs are known, because costs are unknown for this. The exhibition 4.5 million would remain. So this is not money that we would lose if we don't complete within a certain time frame. That money's secured. Operating income for the once stage 1 is complete, council will incur costs, finance costs and maintenance, but the museum wouldn't be open to earn any income. The risks, funding and retention for this option over that period of time, construction escalation costs, and the risks for the project are similar to option A, or the same really. Cost of stage 2 will increase over time. The longer it takes, the higher the costs will be, and the combined costs will definitely be more than option A. So if that makes sense. Option C is to find an alternative location for the museum and its services. So what does that look like? Regardless of whether the community wants to consider a new museum in a different location, the council still has a legal obligation to fix the bathhouse building. And it's required to fix that to a minimum of a 34% MBS under the Building Act by 2042, and potentially an extension of 10 years to 2052 if one was able to be obtained. This would require a new design required with no guarantees of lower cost solution. So the same problems you're trying to solve with the museum are the same problems we're trying to solve with a lower MBS level. The challenges are the same. Building closed until the solution is found and implemented, and the use is found. Cost to date, plus making some of the things more temporary secure for passer-buyers, so we can take some of the fencing down, for instance. And then there's ongoing maintenance over the period for water tightness and preservation, and we would be required to return 38 million under this option, unless other funders or some of the funders decided to stay in, given the fact that our funding agreements require us to achieve the 80% MBS. Museum options for a new museum could be located somewhere else within the city. That needs to be investigated. Council doesn't have any known ground at the moment for this, and depending where it is and what we were building, all those things would need to be investigated. And like I said, the cost and the details for an alternative museum are unknown at this point. Risk with option C. Project costs are unknown for both buildings. To strengthen the bathhouse to a minimum of 34% MBS, like I said, still has the same risk applications than we currently have. Abate things might be smaller, so for instance, some of the structural ply solutions are maybe thinner than they would take for an 80% MBS. And then we've got to find an alternative site for a potential new museum. Funding, council may need to cover the funding for all of the 30% MBS, and we currently don't have a design for that at this point. Funding to design and build a museum in an alternative location. Once again, we're unknown about that at this point. There's a high risk of heritage loss for the bathhouse building. With a lower MBS level, then it's likely in a reasonable seismic event there will be significantly more damage to that building at a lower MBS level than an 80% MBS level. And I know there's been quite a lot of consideration given to the 80% MBS level in ensuring that a seismic earthquake, if it did happen, the building would be able to be repaired. There's a higher risk of suitability of uses. The land was gifted by Ngāti and as a recreational reserve. The purpose of the building, what it could be, if the museum was built somewhere else, has limitations. And then resource consent for lower MBS, that may be difficult to achieve. And the reason for that, it may be that a lower cost solution would be more evasive on heritage, and so heritage may not agree to that solution as council applies for the resource management. That's something to consider anyway. It's really important the community have your say, so council wants to go back to the community to hear what the community wants for this building, what it wants for its museum, and you know, this consultation period is now open, closes on the 21st of June, what you say. Within the consultation document, these are the options that we want you to consider. The first one is, do you want us to continue with the current bathhouse building as the museum, strengthen it to 80% ABS, reopen it as soon as we possibly can, probably realistically now 2026. And if so, tell us why. If not, do you want to pursue option B, which is a staged approach, which will take a longer period of time and will cost some more? Or do you want to consider option C, which is to strengthen the current bathhouse building to 34% NBS, or a minimum of, look for an alternative solution for a new museum in a different location, and if so, why? How you can have your say, there are a number of ways you can do that. So there's the council websites. You can go into the council's reception and pick up some documentation. We have some here at the back of the room for you to hear today. There'll be information at the Rotorua Library here in Te Maori. And then there's the various Facebook pages. There's Let's Talk. And then you can also phone council as well. You can phone council and put your submission in that way. And I am going to take questions, but just before I do that, I think one of the reasons council's coming back to the community, the world has changed since 2018. We've been through COVID, we have a cost of living crisis. Things are quite different. And that is one of the reasons why council wants to come back and make sure that the community has some input into what council decides. Yes, sir.
For option A, what are the contingencies built into the plan?
Right, so I can't tell you the exact amount of the contingency, and the reason for that is we're currently working with our preferred contractor, Hawkins, in terms of a tender price. So I would be reluctant to let them know how much money we've got for their work. But the project is basically built up of about 72% of fixed price for the work that we've already got from Hawkins. There is a QS estimate on the balance of the work. It is also all the costs to date, and includes all the consultants' costs moving forward, plus contingency. Now, council uses a probability factor that Treasury uses. So 81.4 million, there's an 85% probability that the project will be completed within that estimate. Brett.
Is the whole building at 19%?
No, the South Wing extension in 2011 is at 79%.
So that could stand on its own?
It can, but the risk is that you've got the atrium next to it. So it could stand on its own, yes, and it could be used on its own.
Correct. So the next question is, has there been a review of your guys' performance for the first 6 years of the actual museum?
There's been a review of the project, yes, it was completed internally, Brad. Yeah.
And how did that come out?
I wasn't privy to that conversation, I'm sorry.
Just for the audience, I'm Joanne LaGrue, former chairman of Friends of the Museum. I'm only supporting option A, but I would like you to tell us how the 81.4 million costing, what it's made up of.
Right, so it's simply what I told the gentleman at the back there. So there is a fixed price component that Hawkins have already committed to, which is about 71% of the construction cost. The balance of that is in either provisional sums or RQS estimate of the work to complete and a contingency and the cost of money already spent.
Yeah.
Yes.
I have a question. The option A means that it will be completely finished all at the same time.
That's correct.
Option B means that there is going to be upheaval with one part open and one part getting fixed, doing and opening at different times.
No. Option B means that we will complete the structural envelope. The building will be watertight with the fire systems in place, but the whole building would not be able to open because it wouldn't meet code of compliance.
Okay, so to finish my question, I was looking at it and I was thinking, if you're going to do that, there's no revenue being garnered from it from the stage 2. Stage 1, when you've finished and it's open, revenue will start coming in, right, for the city?
For stage 2 completion, when the museum reopens, yes.
Stage 1.
No, there'll be no revenue for the museum.
Option
Option A, sorry.
Option A. Yeah.
Option A, yes, when it's completed, the building will reopen.
Revenue, because it's all open, the revenue will start coming in.
Yeah, correct.
From the, yeah, okay. That is, option is the only one.
I'm glad the issue of revenue has been brought up because prior to the closing, it cost $5 million a year to maintain. It meant maintenance of the building and staffing, and only half of that was covered by revenue from the museum. So the ratepayers had been funding $2.5 million of the cost of the museum previous to it closing. And can you tell us what the maintenance cost and what the proposed revenue will be once it's reopened?
Sure. So the maintenance costs in the budget proposed when we reopen, maintenance alone is approximately $500,000 from off the top of my head. The revenue streams, obviously, prior to closure, we were getting close to $3 million. And obviously there's been price escalation, price increases since then. The estimate for reopening a full year, not a partial year, full year, I think it's 4.8 million or something like that.
4.8 million, sorry, in revenue.
In revenue, yes.
And it only made half what it cost to maintain prior to its closure, according to the council lecture that I listened to.
Yeah, and I think realistically that would probably be the same for the future model in terms of that 50-50 contribution between income and council.
There's quite an ongoing cost, like several million to ratepayers in maintenance every year if we go for the reopening option.
That's correct.
Sure. Option A and option B. Surely, if you're going for option A, you've got to do if you're going for option B, you've still got to do option A first, right?
We do part of option A first, Brett, yes.
So why wouldn't you have it do it all right for option B, so you could actually do option B halfway through when you're starting option A, correct? You could flick into option. Have you got the funding?
We could flip if we were doing option option B. We would still start with the work of option A. But
at what point would you then have to stop before we go to option B?
We would stop when we completed the work that's scoped in option A, or if we've got additional funding, then council can make a decision to continue on.
Because you're still going to have a rebuild of around about 3 years, right?
Rebuild is 29 months under option A. I don't know option B because it depends how long we have to wait for money.
3 years, 29 months, overruns about, right? So you could be 18 months into it, then all of a sudden, yep, we've got enough funding, let's carry on.
Yes, we could do that.
Thank you.
Can I ask about the rates, please? You've told us it would be $73.50 per year per ratepayer if it goes ahead under option A. Is that a fixed cost like what everybody's seeing on their rates demand, $73.50 to pay?
No.
Or will we get a varied amount depending on how much rates we already pay? So those of us who pay 10,000 in rates will pay a lot more towards the museum than those who pay 2,000 or 3,000 in rates. Can you just clarify that, please?
Look, I can't answer that question for you, but if we could take your name and contact details, we'll get someone from our finance team to get in contact
Could
with
that
you.
be put on the...
Yeah, most certainly can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
Yes, sir.
Would I be right in thinking the right-hand wing, I think it refers to South Wing, has actually been built relatively recently?
Yes, the South Wing extension was built in 2011.
Has it been costed to demolish all the other and rebuild it using modern building methods to look exactly like that?
No, it hasn't, sir, because it's listed as a Category 1 heritage building. To get a demolition order on that building would be unlikely.
Even if we're going to rebuild it to look exactly the same, but using modern methods?
Yes, yeah. I guess it's a bit like Buckingham Palace. We could bowl that, couldn't we, and rebuild it in modern materials. I don't think it would ever happen. Yeah. Kyle.
Stuart Lyle, first and chair of the Centennial Trust, and whilst Joanne and I and other trustees thought that our job had finished with the completion of the building, we never thought we'd be involved in restoration. But having said that, if you and Amy could just comment, I think critical to this whole discussion today and for the general populace is the involvement of Te Aroa and Ngāti Whakaue in particular. Now they have a huge say in all of this, and they've been party to all the negotiations up to now. I can't speak for them, but I know they're very supportive of option A, first option, but you may wish to comment. And also if you could lead that commentary into B Company, because we are the national repository for the B Company Memorial, and I think that is critically important to this town historically and also of national significance.
Certainly so.
So if you could just comment briefly on, I think Gina's just come in. Gina may be a better one to comment on Ngāti Whakaue. I did see Gina arrive. Sorry, Gina.
Did you hear that, Gina? Nothing like being put on the spot.
Gina, if you could just comment about Ngāti Whakaue and Te Aroa's input into this project today. Sure.
We are asked, so one of the, kia ora tātou, my name's Gina Rangi, I'm the executive sponsor for the project, and thank you very much for the great presentation. In terms of Te Aroa's input, I think there's been a long history. The collection within the museum, there are a number of really important taonga to Te Aroa, and so the consistent message we've had is that there must be continued access by the community and by Te Aroa to seeing the collection. So that's been a consistent message that we've received the whole way through. In terms of the building, I think it's probably fair to say that it's very much like the community. There are people who have a strong feeling in favour of the building, and then there are others who have a different view. I think one of the things that we will be doing is asking the Pukinga Koike, which is our kaumātua group that supports the museum, to convene a meeting with Te Aroa to talk about this, and similar to this community consultation. When we started had the council meeting, we've had communication from Monty Morrison in particular about strong support from Ngāti Whakaue for the building project in option 1. Having said that, though, I don't want to preempt the Te Aroa conversation that has to be had still. I think there's strong feelings about the building either way, but certainly their priority is the collection and having an appropriate place that people can access and serve. And I think they'll be looking at the options to make sure that the collection's not going to continue to be locked away and inaccessible to, particularly to children, but also to the community as a whole and to Te Aroa.
Thank you.
Jill.
Following on from what Gina has just said, has there been any funding commitment from Te Aroa or Ngāti Whakaue?
No, not at this point.
Are we likely to have any funding? Or?
Look, I can't answer that question on behalf of
I was really wondering, have they shown any...
Gina might know a little bit more than I.
At this stage, their contribution is the land and the collection, and they have also been very strong supporters of things like the education team. So they sponsor the buses for our children to come from all the schools in the district. So there has been significant support over the operational activities. We haven't approached them around contributing to the bill, mainly because, like every other organisation, and they're also facing cost of living pressures from their owners as well. But certainly in terms of their ongoing support, the Ngāti Whakau Education Endowment Trust have been really supportive around and have made submissions in the annual plan process about the need to continue to make their, to support people to be able to see what's in them, to access that collection and understand our collective history.
Yeah, you said mentioned that the council had put up another 9 million, and it was 9 million from central government.
Yes.
Can we expect their enthusiasm to be the same as the council, so that if there was a rise above that, you could expect more from central government, or is that just at the end of it?
Look, there is ongoing conversations with central government right now. I can't say any more than that, other than the mayor is making inquiries at a very high level.
Right.
Can I answer that?
Oh, sure.
I don't need the cheat sheet. But a group of us are currently seeking and finalising at this point in time a meeting with Minister Seth Maloney, while she's also the Deputy Prime Minister. She's also Minister for Art, Culture and Heritage, so she writes the cheque for all of these sort of things. So a group of us, including our good friend behind me here, Stuart Edward from the Rotorua Trust, who have made a mammoth contribution to this. We're going down in the near future.
So you're only about 60 days, well.
You're
only about 60
We're
days.
fully aware of the timeline, we certainly are.
Just wanted to make sure didn't want you to get knocked over.
No. But I think in terms of risk is a big issue for a number of people, particularly some of our politicians, and that's one of the things that will be at the forefront of our discussion with the Minister. When we meet with them, you are correct, we're in the midst of an election cycle that kicks off, I think, on the 12th of July, 3 months from the election date. So, but we're incredibly positive, all of us. Stuart, Joanne, me, all our trustees, we honestly believe we can see the prize in sight, so it's not that far away. So just join with us, put in your submissions and express your views to the politicians who will ultimately make the final decision, not us.
Joanne.
Stuart, how much of the shortfall is tentatively covered?
Of the 28 right now, tentative 9 is covered. Council would need to make a decision on the additional 9, and we've got a further 10 to find.
Well, I'd like to announce that Joe LeGroux, my husband and myself, we have a Goldie painting which we're prepared to sell with 100% of the money going towards the museum, but only if option A is done.
Thanks, Joe. That's very much appreciated.
Thank you, Joanne, on behalf of all the low-income people and the people in poverty in Rotorua. That's going to make a huge difference. Thank you. And my hope is that we can. My hope is that we can find more people who are philanthropists who want to see this, not just from Rotorua, but from the whole of New Zealand, because I'm hearing that a lot of people know about our museum, they want it to be restored, but they're not paying the rates. And on behalf of all the people, 50% of whom are in poverty in Rotorua, I really hope we can find other people who are prepared to fund this, because we cannot worsen poverty in Rotorua. That is my feeling.
Thank you for your comments. Stuart.
Kia ora tātou, Stuart Edward, I'm currently the chair of the Rotorua Trust. A wee bit of history. When this came up in 2016, the Trust looked at the possibility of, with the council raising 12.5 million and the need to go to government, there was clearly a need to be able to go with a position of strength to the government at the time. And our Trust at the time unanimously agreed to put $10 million into that project, which allowed the council to then go and negotiate with the government of the time to be able to get the agreement for the 53 million at the time, or 55 million at the time. And so we have a real vested interest to see this, because this is all part of our community growth, our wider as a city, and we see no alternative other than option A. To that end, I also want to just reinforce that, Joanne, we've got about $3 to $4 million worth of art works owned by the trust sitting in the Old Hope Road facility. So there's a whole lot of artwork that belongs to this, that's really all part of our community. We've got no way of allowing that to be shown to the community on a regular basis. So our children understand the legacy, where we've come from, and then hopefully where our society is going to go. So that's another part of the importance of having this up. We're currently having discussions with our funders who look after the money for the Rotorua Trust, and are finding ways to be able to ensure that we can contribute to providing. There is a proviso that we want option A to be gone, but we'll undertake to create a further contribution once we've just worked out how much we can sensibly give, and then still continue our $3 to $4 million a year back into the community. So that's work in progress, but I just thought, you talked about philanthropic trusts. This trust, which was set up in the mid-90s, has done a fantastic job in contributing to the city, and this is another one of the projects we hope will add to the wider of our city in the future. Thank you, Stuart.
I just wanted to follow up on something Chris said earlier, to clarify something. You were talking about the museum making a loss pre-COVID, yes, on an operational basis, and I think the number is about $2 million a year.
The operational cost, particularly the operational cost, the operational cost we talk about includes depreciation, finance cost, and corporate overhead cost. Yeah.
And that is still expected to be a loss after stage 2 is completed, but not so big. Is that correct?
That would be, well, you wouldn't have such a big operational cost under a staged approach, because it's staged. First stage B option, we wouldn't have the cost of operating the museum itself, but we still have ongoing costs of maintenance, we still have the collection to maintain.
Yeah, but once it's back, once stage 2 is completed, whenever that happens, it still makes a loss. Is that correct?
That's correct. I don't think you'll find a museum in the country that turns a profit. Jill?
My question was really for Stuart. Would the Rotorua Trust be so generous if the other options were looked at, or would you commit yourselves only to option 1?
I made it very clear, Jill, it's option A.
Option A only?
Yes.
I suggest that the meeting here have a show of hands as to who set forth option A. To me, it appears that the majority are in favour, and it would be an idea to just see.
But the best way you can do that is submit. The council wants to hear the community's views.
I'd have to say that with that option A is the only one you get anything at the end. Option B and C, you pay your money, there's no guarantee that it's going to finish and you'll have a museum of just and it may cost more.
Then I would encourage you to put that in your submission. Yeah.
And with option A, you've got a guaranteed fixed price finish, you're saying?
No, sorry, Brett, no, we do not have a fixed price. You won't get a fixed price.
So therefore the 82 million could be 105. Therefore you're goldy.
There is a risk, yes, that the final price could exceed 81.4 million. Yes, there's a risk there. But we've done as much as we possibly can in terms of risk mitigation before the project starts. As with all these heritage buildings, it's what you find inside them that you don't know about now. Now there is a risk around the ground, we can't mitigate that.
All options have a cost escalation risk.
Yep, they do.
Yeah. One of the options, at the council meeting that I was listening to was saying if this goes over budget, they cannot stop the project, even if it goes 20 or 30. We are committed as a district to continuing to fund the overrun. And sorry, my train of thought, which means we could end up by borrowing another 30, 40, 50 million on top of the original 38 million I think we are paying towards it now. And we're already paying another 41 million in this year's annual plan. We're borrowing another 41 million. So that means our borrowings probably could escalate to another 60 or 80 million this year alone if we go ahead with this. Which means the rates of $73 will double or treble or quadruple, along with the annual plan borrowings of 41 million, which means our rates could go up by another 500,000, 2,000 every year, and we're committed to that for the next 20 years. And I'm just thinking people should know that before we say yes to this, we must know the implications fully on what it's going to cost us as a community, what it's going to cost our low-income families.
Yeah, we can only do that for option A right now because the other options, there's components, or all of the option is unknown. What I can say is that there are conversations that want to be had with central government about who holds the risk beyond 81.4 million.
Yeah,
it's a conversation.
But there's a lot of money that sort of may come forward but may not. We still haven't got that money on what it's...
Yeah, within option A, though, within the paper, council said it will not start the project until it has funding confirmed.
Yeah, but how much funding? We don't know. There's sort of an abstract figure out there. We just don't know what that council will make the
I guess just on that as well, that when we say that we're fully committed, contractually we would have a contract whereby we have an agreed scope of works, and if we had a variation for some unknown, then we have to approve that, and we're not obliged to approve variations. So if there was a very, very, very large unknown, we would be able to have a conversation with council in terms of whether or not that was something we did continue with or not. So you're not, I guess, contractually locked in for an uncapped sum. I guess what we're saying is that I think what was meant is that once you start, if you want to have your finished museum, then once you've started, you need to keep going. But obviously there is always limits in terms of that, so it's not uncapped indefinitely.
But if you look back, Amy, say the Sahara was meant to be 17.5 and ended up 34, and even the library before that, there was another 10 million blowout. It's the control. You say you have got control, but you haven't.
Yeah, I can comment on that, Brett. The 17 million that was for the Sir Howard Morrison was an estimate in the first case. The same as the museum back in the 2018 long-term plan, there was an estimate at that time of 30 million. So until you actually get all your risks identified, mitigate as much as you can, then you get closer to an actual price for these projects. I saw someone hand up down back there. Yes.
I wondered whether the council was totally committed to the museum. I'm shocked that a generation of children have not been able to go to the museum. And I just wondered, you've got three options that will include a museum, but the number C, we don't know what that would cost. That might well cost over 80 million to build. So is the council committed to having a museum in this town?
Council has put up three options for you. They all include a museum of some sort.
Right.
And can I just say that Blenheim have just built an art gallery and a library for 20 million, just opened, and that half of that was paid for by government. So they paid 10 million for their art gallery and library.
And I think if you look at our funding at 38 million so far with an additional 9, it's around about half as well. Yes.
All the fundings you put in the report are essentially public funding. Has private enterprise been looked? There's another building in New Zealand that got similar but obviously different challenges, Chateau Tongariro. I've heard, and I don't know how accurate it is, there are 2 or 3 entrepreneur groups looking at taking it on. Any options in New Zealand?
I'm not aware of any entrepreneur that wants to own a museum. Which we contribute to. Yes, most definitely. If you remember in the Sir Howard Morrison Centre, we had a very generous donation from Sir Owen Glenn. So yes, it's a possibility.
Look, can I just say something?
Sure.
I'm a retired architect, and this building here is one of the most beautiful buildings in New Zealand. And there is no option. You've got to go for option A to restore it. If you do option B, what will happen is it will start to deteriorate. So the only way to do it is option A. This is one of the most beautiful buildings in New Zealand. You've got to save it.
Once again, I'd encourage you to put your submission in.
All the old hotels in Rotorua have burned down, so we haven't got many heritage buildings. Isn't it?
Kia ora. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Karen and Hata Kukurima. Somebody speaking on behalf of the New Zealand History Teachers Association, just picking up on the point about an entire generation. Where are you? So that's okay. The Aotearoa New Zealand History's curriculum is now mandatory. And that goes from year 1 to year 10, and it requires that a whole community, it's going to take a village to actually address the inequities that English medium education has, that it has perpetuated over the years. And so this history's curriculum is really a truth telling towards a reconciliation towards a more prosperous shared future for everybody. We can't afford to postpone this beyond option A because it will create a real injustice for the akonga of Te Arawa in terms of their ability to access the taonga, in terms of their ability to access the kōrero that comes from an experienced museum education team who have the necessary requirements to be able to deliver an education service with integrity around those taonga. And it's not just our taonga no Te Arawa, the B Company as well, that the entire museum actually, it really does require this community's concerted commitment to ensure that option A goes through, in my opinion.
Are there any other questions before I finish? Yes.
Can we have an option A without the rate increase? No. My name's Donna, and yes, I'm a Jaffa, and I've only lived here 4 years.
Yes.
But prior to that, I visited this beautiful museum several times, and quite frankly, I'm not educated, I'm not an accountant, I'm not an architect, any of those things, but 7 years is appalling. Waited 7 years to get to this point. If I had something in consultation for 7 years, I'd fire it. Sorry, excuse me. But I'm just astonished that it's even down to this discussion. Beautiful building, it's a beautiful museum, and it's just, and I don't want a rate increase. Sorry, I want a fixed income. There you go.
Thank you.
I'd just like to say thank you very much for coming and presenting this meeting here. You've had all the facts and been very informative.
Thank you. There's a question at the very back there.
I just said, isn't the decorating hole underneath the museum? I think we were watching the Russian concrete trucks dumping building was really like 2 years ago.
It's not there now.
Are you sure?
No, I am sure the geotech testing. No, there was some ground improvements done that excavated some soft ground under the southern wing. So there was a geotechnical solution to remove that and where the pad sits today. So yes, there was a hole dug and it's fine.
I really want to see that.
Sure. Okay, well, look, once again, thank you very much. We appreciate your attendance. There are further talks. There's another talk or presentation to the community at the Sir Howard Morrison Centre next Thursday at 5. Next Wednesday. Oh, okay. Next Wednesday at 5:30 at the centre. So if you've got other friends that want to come along and listen, please share that information with us. And the submission information is back at the museum for you.